Okay, welcome to Chapter 13, the lucky chapter. So Chapter 13 is on server hardware strategies, page 221. Okay, so they first start talking about what is a server. You know, a server are things that have like dependents or things that are dependent upon it, right? So, you know, services are people that depending on something, I'm trying to get to a web server, you know, so I'm a client and I want to be able to get to your web page. Okay. So unlike a desktop, where a desktop typically only has like one person that it serves, right? You know, you have a PC and a cube. You know, if that one goes down, no one knows other than the one person sitting there, right? But when a server goes down, there's an awful lot of people who are dependent upon that server being there, you know, for email or web or file or print or whatever, right? Okay, kind of simple. So what is a server? Well, it's basically just something that is a resource that people go to get something done. Okay. So there's basically three strategies when you're trying to figure out, you know, how to do service. So one way to do a server is, you know, all eggs in one basket. You know, basically you're a small business and you have one machine that acts as, you know, for all the accounting, you know, your login accounts and printing and email and database and web, you know, everything, you know, just everything all together. The other one is called Beautiful Snowflakes. I love that. Basically means there's several servers that are unique to do this one thing, and so they're tuned a little differently, and so none of them are exactly the same because they're slightly different. But you know, each one has its specialized thing. And then the other one is this whole concept of virtualization, where you buy in bulk and then redistribute your resources as you need them. Okay, there's an awful lot of other variations. I mean, there's grid computing. We'll talk about that. Blade computing, cloud, software as a service, and then server appliances, and we'll talk about what that means. So on page 221, they kind of zero in on that first option of all eggs in one basket. Right off the bat, you can probably tell, you know, if that one server died, well, you're screwed, right? Okay. So Microsoft does have a small business server. They called it the Essentials. So there used to be an entire product that came with everything. It came with like the Microsoft Exchange. It came with, you know, file and print services already enabled. It's, you know, it was your domain controller. It was everything. Anyway, Microsoft Server Essentials. I mentioned before that it has 25 user licenses and 50 device licenses built in. So for most companies, that would probably be sufficient. If you're, you know, a small, you know, boot repair business or a flower shop, you know, you don't need anything fancy. The problem with having everything in one basket is you need a very strong basket. You need some sort of protection in case things go south. So we are going to be talking about RAID. Now we're going to hit this again in, you know, chapter 43. But for right now, we're going to give an overview of what RAID is. You're going to need to do backups, I mean, for your critical data. And then quite frankly, even if you had a backup and your server caught on fire and melted to the floor, what are you going to do with the backup? You don't have another piece of equipment. You would have to go out and purchase another piece of equipment, plug it in, and then do the restore. So, you know, you're talking days, weeks to be able to get a new piece of hardware plugged in. So, you know, having backups is not always useful if you don't have a way to restore them, right? In fact, the value of backup is practically nothing. It's the value of the restore that means something, right? Okay, good. All right. So, server expansion capability. If you have just one, you might want to consider getting a machine that can expand. You know, unlike PCs that you buy at the house, it is possible that a server would have like 2 or 4 sockets on it for CPUs, and you just buy it with 2. And so you have 2 spare slots you can plug stuff in. And unlike your machine at home, most likely all of your RAM slots are not going to be populated. Okay, so that's kind of cool. Now, there's a whole concept called a forklift replacement. What basically means is out with the old, in with the new. In other words, nothing gets transferred over. You know, you just pick up the old server, take it out, plunk it down, take the new one in, put it in its place, restore all the stuff, kick it on. Now, this is time consuming, right? You're not like you're going to do this in an hour. Okay, just saying. But, you know, nothing carrying over is scary. You know, there could be some tweaks. I mean, let's say, for example, you were running, I don't know, Windows Server 2016, and then your machine caught on fire and burnt to the ground, and so you quick went out and ordered a new server from Dell, and it showed up 3 days later with 2019 on it, and you just say, well, I'm going to restore the backup. No. No, because the backup's going to be for the old system, right? Okay, good. So if you have an all eggs in one basket thing, when it comes time to do, any type of upgrade, or even patch management, there's a risk that something's going to go wrong, right? I mean, it's not, if you had more than one server, you can say, well, let me try this patch over here and make sure it works. Oh, okay, nothing happened. Now I'll go back over to this first machine and do it. But if you only have one machine, I mean, it's pretty doggone risky. So there's a thing called dependency hell. Now, this used to be a really big problem with, I'm going to use some term, DLL, dynamic link loading libraries, where one piece of software will put a DLL, then you install another piece of software and it replaces that guy, okay? And so which version of the DLL are you actually using is kind of complex, because the new piece of software might overwrite. Now, Microsoft is pretty much will fix that now. Basically, they don't overwrite practically anything that's in the Windows System 32 folder anymore. But in the day, it was a kind of a thing. But again, if you only have one server, well, those kind of upgrades and patches are going to cause problems. And of course, it's difficult to predict in advance when something like that might happen, right? It's like, okay. And then scheduling downtime. If you only have one server, how the heck do you do, a Microsoft patch or an upgrade to the operating system? And you have no choice but like go out there in the middle of the night, set your alarm, go out there, go back to the company at 2 o'clock in the morning and do the upgrade, because you only got one. Okay, you can pretty much all figure out that's kind of, having one is just too scary. Okay, so the next thing to talk about is the beautiful snowflakes. I like that. So I use a separate server for each one of my services. For example, my web server is running Linux, and I'm using Apache 2, and I've got MySQL is the database on that thing, and it runs just fine. But for corporate data, I use Microsoft, Server with SQL Server on it. So each one of these things are completely different, and they're extraordinarily unique. And, I might have older version of a software on one, might have Windows 2016 on this one, maybe Server 22 on this one, So it makes it really kind of difficult for one person to learn all this stuff. So sizing and tuning is better. Now, let me explain what I mean by that. So let's get back to the Microsoft only scenario. I can tune a server to be a good web server. No problem. I know exactly what I need to do. I need to be able to, maximize, input and output from the network card, right? I don't really need graphics or anything like that, So I can say, screw that, I'll just buy an El Cheapo graphics card. Now, for a database server, I need lots of RAM and I need very, very fast disks, okay? So I can tune a server for doing databases and I can tune a server for doing web, but I really, really can't tune a server to do both, okay? It's just tough to do. So having these beautiful snowflakes sometimes has a real reason. Okay. So since each one of these things are different, they may actually, have different administrators for each one. That could be good. In other words, only the web server administrator can mess with the web server. He or she can't mess with the database server. That might be useful. Maybe. I don't know. But again, let's say each one of these things were different and you're responsible for operating the RAID controller, but there's 3 different RAID controllers from 3 different vendors. Like, jeez. So yeah, beautiful snowflakes sometimes has its purpose, but it also can be a pain in the butt. And then, of course, asset tracking. You have to maintain a database of all these things and how they're configured, because it's not like you can say, oh, well, here's the instructions for installing all of our servers. Well, no, if each one is slightly different, well, then no. You're going to have to have a list of all of the services that are running on each one, because, I have seen a scenario where somebody said, hey, I think we can shut down server 1234. No one's using it anymore. And I go, are you sure? And they go, yeah. Nobody's been used that for 6 months. And I go, okay. So I go over and, shut down the server, and then the phone starts ringing. Hey, how come my such and such isn't working? I go, jeez. Okay, so it's very, very likely that you do not really remember what service is on each one of the servers. Okay, that's a very real thing. Okay, and then of course, when you're doing asset, you need to have where the machine is, who's the primary operator. Like if you need to call them on the phone and say, hey, something funky's going on, can you go look? Who is the person? What services are running there, okay? I remember I gave you an example of running this software called SOSOS, and it does that. It keeps track of all of the services that are running, okay? You can see, oh, you've got file and print services turned on. Oh, you've got, SQL Server turned on. Oh, you got web services turned on, okay? Now, it can't tell if you're using them, but it can tell that the services are enabled. Okay, so the goal here would be to try to reduce the variations, have it so that not every machine is absolutely different than the previous one. So the way I would do it is I would document everything that was not the default, like during the install, like for example, I gave you guys a checklist on installing Windows Server 2019. And most of the time I said, take the default, take the default, take the default. Here is where you do not take the default. Do this instead. Okay. And seize the opportunity to make them all the same or the defaults, the lazy path, so to speak. The lazy path being make sure, install all of them the same as much as possible. If your organization will let you stick with one vendor, that would be really, really good. Now, I know a lot of people, that's just not possible. I mean, back in the day when I worked for the Army, we would order, servers, and it might be an HP server, it might be a Dell server, we don't know. We just put in the specifications and whatever came. Okay, there's this really cool story talking about Google's SysOp Death Squad. It's like a really cool read. Basically, it's like an orphan server. I've got an old server and I don't really know what it's being used for. And so I'm really reluctant to shut it down. And so they actually had a group of people that would run around and find those people who are still using it. Say, hey, are you still using server number 1, 2, 3, 4? And they go, yeah. And they say, well, you got 6 weeks to be able to move over to some other server. We're going to shut that guy down. And so, these death squads would go around and find all these dependencies, typically other services or people, and say, I'm going to force you to adapt and upgrade and migrate to another server because this server is going down. And without that, without having a death squad, no server would ever go away. I mean, every old server they ever had would still be there today because no one had the guts to pull the plug and see what happened. Okay? All right. So let's talk about the number of the generations of hardware. I mean, in the old days, a server would have a SCSI interface, small computer server. Yeah, what the heck does that stand for? Oh well, SCSI. But now, if you go to the store and buy a hard drive, there's not going to be any SCSI drives whatsoever on the shelf for you to buy. Zippo, none. And you're not going to have any at home. That's just not the way. So older generation of hardware, okay, that's a real thing. You have an old server that's been around for, 10 years. It's probably using technology that you cannot buy today. So when it comes time to replace it, you're going to have to start over with a completely another set of technology, which is probably for the best. And then global optimization. I mentioned that you could tune these things to be very, very specific, right? I mean, you tune a web server to make it work well over the web, and tune a database server to make it do database things. Well, there is some global optimization that you could do. You kind of start the process off. By the way, I love this cool term. I can tune a piano, but I can't tune a fish. Okay, that was silly. Okay, we're coming up on the 15-minute mark.